Okay, Saturday morning, February 28th, 2026.
Right.
If you've looked at your phone at all in the last few hours, you know the world has entirely shifted on its axis.
It really has.
Yeah.
We're looking at a historic pivot point today.
Yeah. We aren't just reading breaking news headlines here. The screens are flashing red. There are sirens sounding across Israel, huge explosions reported in Tehran, and just massive pillars of smoke rising over the city.
It's the exact scenario intelligence agencies have been wargaming for 20 years now. And suddenly it's live.
Exactly.
We're seeing reports from the ground right now, and these are being verified by sources like the Jerusalem Post and the Kyiv Independent. They are confirming massive, coordinated explosions in the Iranian capital.
This isn't a shadow war anymore.
No, the shadows are completely gone.
Right. And look, the mission for this deep dive today is specific. We aren't here to just redo the ticker tape or give you the surface level stuff.
Plenty of places are doing that.
Exactly. We've stacked the sources for you. We're pulling from INSS intelligence briefs, global reactions, even Chinese state media editorials to figure out the actual strategy behind the noise.
We need to connect the dots.
Right. We have to understand why this is happening today, specifically today, what Operation Lion's Roar actually aims to achieve, and this terrifying game of nuclear poker playing out in the tunnels under those mountains.
And that nuclear element is the absolute key here. Because while the explosions on the surface are incredibly loud, it's the silence regarding what's happening underground that should really worry us.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the lead.
Yeah.
We are talking about a major coordinated U.S. and Israeli offensive.
Yes. Major combat operation.
But the announcement itself was, it was unconventional. It didn't start with a press secretary in a briefing room.
No, not at all.
It started with a video on Truth Social from Donald Trump. I've been looking over the transcript of that video, and the language is just incredibly specific.
Could be deliberate wording.
He calls it a noble mission, which, is fairly standard rhetoric for this kind of thing. But then he says the goal is to obliterate Iran's missile industry and annihilate the Navy.
Right. And annihilate is a doctrine-level word.
How so?
Well, in military terms, there's a distinct difference between degrade and annihilate. Degrade means slowing them down, damaging the infrastructure. Annihilate means removing the capability entirely. It's erasing it from the board.
Erasing it entirely.
Exactly. The U.S. is signaling here that they aren't looking for a pause or a ceasefire. They're looking to permanently remove pieces from the geopolitical board.
And he didn't stop at the military targets either. There was a direct address to Iranian civilians in that video. He told them to shelter immediately because, and I quote, bombs will be dropping everywhere.
Yeah.
That phrasing really struck me. It's not the surgical pinpoint language we usually hear during these briefings. It sounds deliberately overwhelming.
It's designed to be overwhelming. It's psychological warfare coupled tightly with kinetic action. But while the U.S. president is setting that very broad, aggressive tone, the operational details coming out of Tel Aviv paint a much more tactical picture.
Right. Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement officially identifies the operation as Misa Shagat Harari, Operation Lion's Roar.
Though it's interesting, if you look at the Islamabad Post's reporting this morning, they refer to it as Operation Shield of Judah.
I saw that. Why the difference?
It really highlights the fog of war in these early hours. Shield of Judah might actually be the internal designation for the defensive component.
Ah, like the interceptors.
Exactly. The interceptor's operating over Tel Aviv right now, while Lion's Roar is the offensive strike package. Or, it could simply be a breakdown in Allied communication protocols, which happens.
Sure.
But regardless of the name, the target list that Netanyahu confirmed is extremely telling.
Let's go through that. We're looking at IRGC command centers, ballistic missile sites, and Basij paramilitary bases.
Yes.
The inclusion of the Basij targets is what really caught my eye. The Basij aren't the ones manning the long-range missiles, right? They're the internal enforcers.
The morality police. The riot control.
Right. They're the ones on motorcycles breaking up civilian protests with batons and gunfire.
That is a critical observation to make. Think about it. If you are strictly worried about a nuclear weapon hitting Tel Aviv, you bomb the missile silos. You bomb the research labs.
You don't bomb the riot police.
Right. If you bomb the Basij, you are trying to break the regime's physical grip on its own population. You are intentionally clearing the streets.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests this operation has a dual purpose.
Disarm the military.
And destabilize the government.
Simultaneously.
Okay, and looking at the hardware involved, the U.S. is clearly all in on ensuring this works. The scale is massive. We've got the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group just parked off the coast of Haifa.
Which is a massive projection of power. But more importantly, I was looking at a global Guardian intelligence update, and they flagged the movement of F-22 Raptors. They've moved 6 more to RAF Lakenheath in the UK, and they sent a whole squadron directly into the theater in Israel.
See, the F-22 deployment is the strongest military signal you can possibly send.
More than the aircraft carrier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Ford is essentially a floating city, right? It projects power just by existing in the water, but the F-22 is a door kicker.
A door kicker. I like that.
It's a pure air superiority stealth fighter. Its entire design purpose is to murder other aircraft and completely dismantle integrated air defense systems before the enemy even knows they're being targeted.
So they aren't just there to patrol.
No, you do not deploy 24 Raptors for a routine patrol. You deploy them to violently sanitize the airspace so your heavy bombers can operate with total impunity.
It effectively turns the skies over Iran into U.S. territory.
For all intents and purposes, yes. And we actually saw the diplomatic foreshadowing of this just before the strikes.
The embassy evacuations.
Exactly. The evacuation of non-essential staff from the U.S. embassies in Jerusalem and Beirut. That wasn't just standard caution. That was the final checklist item being ticked off before the execute order was given. Also, we should mention Israel declaring that special state of emergency for 48 hours.
Right, locking down the home front. Which brings us to the really big question, the why now question.
Yeah.
Because on paper, if you're following the timeline from these sources, diplomacy was still actively happening.
Technically, yes.
U.S. and Iranian officials were in Geneva literally 2 days ago, February 26th. Oman was mediating the talks.
And that meeting in Geneva is likely where the final fuse was lit.
But how do you go from sitting at a negotiating table to annihilation in 48 hours? The U.S. narrative is that the talks hit a brick wall, but I'm reading the take from CGTN Chinese state media, and they are framing this entirely differently.
They usually do.
They're calling the strike an abandonment of diplomacy and a betrayal of process.
Yes. The Chinese perspective here is that the U.S. used those Geneva talks entirely as a stalling tactic, a smokescreen, just to get the Ford strike group into position.
Oh.
They argue that Iran was actually at the table offering concessions. However, if you look at the Western intelligence assessment, which we see heavily referenced in the INSS research, the belief is that Iran was the one stalling.
Stalling for what?
The U.S. and Israel firmly believe Tehran was using the diplomatic process to buy the last few days. They needed to finish something underground.
The breakout.
Right, the breakout. The assessment shifted dramatically. They concluded Iran wasn't months away from a viable nuclear weapon. They were days away.
Just days.
Days.
Yeah.
The intelligence suggested they had already developed the delivery systems, the ballistic missiles capable of hitting U.S. interests, and were in the final stages of mating them with nuclear warheads.
So the U.S. logic is basically, if we don't strike this weekend, next week we are negotiating with a fully armed nuclear power.
Exactly. It's the classic preemptive strike argument. It's a doctrine of survival.
But we really have to contextualize this for you listening, because this isn't the first time we've been in this exact situation. We all remember Operation Midnight Hammer from June 2025.
We do. And that operation is the ghost haunting everything happening today.
Back then, the headlines were almost identical. Nuclear sites destroyed, programs set back by years. But here we are, just 8 months later, doing it all over again, but bigger. Why did Midnight Hammer fail?
I wouldn't say it failed necessarily. It was insufficient.
Insufficient.
Yeah. They hit the surface facilities at Natanz and Fordo. They absolutely destroyed the infrastructure they could see from the sky. But the Iranian nuclear program is designed like an iceberg.
Most of it is hidden.
Right. The dangerous part is underwater. Or, in this specific case, deeply buried under mountains.
Which brings us perfectly to the nuclear deep dive part of this discussion.
Yeah.
I want to look at the numbers from the INSS research because they are, frankly, terrifying.
They are very sobering.
They estimate that Iran is currently sitting on about 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. 400 kilograms. Now, 60% enrichment is technically classified as civilian grade. But in terms of actual nuclear physics, the leap from 60% to 90%, which is weapons grade, is incredibly short.
It's the final sprint.
Yes. It is exponentially easier and faster to go from 60 to 90 than it is to get from 0 to 60.
So they've already done the hardest part.
They've done the hardest part. And here's the kicker. After those 2025 strikes, They didn't stop enriching. They took that massive 400-kilogram stockpile and they buried it
Literally buried it under the rubble.
under the rubble of the damaged sites and moved it deeper. The intelligence reports explicitly mention specific sites: Pickaxe Mountain and the Moshe site.
I saw those names.
These aren't just concrete bunkers in the desert. They are massive, sprawling tunnel complexes dug deep, deep into solid rock. They were designed specifically by engineers to withstand standard American bunker buster munitions.
So Operation Lion's War isn't just about dropping bombs on buildings today. It's an attempt to crack open literal mountains.
It's a seismic engineering challenge as much as a military one. And this physical reality, this race against the rock, has triggered a fascinating high-stakes debate inside Tehran itself.
The nuclear ambiguity dilemma.
Exactly.
I found this part of the source material really compelling. In the West, we tend to think of the Iranian regime as this completely unified monolith. But there's a serious split right now. You have the hardliners versus the pragmatists.
It's a fundamental fight for the regime's survival. The hardliners are looking at the geopolitical map. They look east, and they see North Korea.
Right.
North Korea is a pariah state, absolutely. But it's a state with nuclear weapons that nobody ever invades.
Because the cost is too high.
Right. Then they look at Libya and Iraq, countries that either gave up their WMD programs voluntarily or never finished building them.
Yeah.
And what happened? Their leaders ended up dead in the streets.
So the hardliner argument internally is, look, we need to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty right now. Announce to the world we have the bomb and deter the American invasion.
Exactly. Be North Korea.
Yeah.
It's the only guarantee of survival.
But the pragmatists disagree.
Violently. The pragmatists are screaming that if they actually do that, they instantly unite the entire planet against them. Not just the U.S. and Europe, but China and maybe even Russia.
They become completely toxic.
Right. The pragmatists argue that ambiguity, keeping everyone guessing about whether they actually have a working bomb, is much safer than absolute certainty.
But by launching this massive strike today, the U.S. and Israel have essentially cast their own vote in that internal debate.
Yeah.
They decided they couldn't wait around to see who won the argument in Tehran.
They absolutely forced the hand. They are betting billions of dollars and potentially regional stability that they can destroy the centrifuge tunnels at Pickaxe Mountain before the hardliners can physically bolt a completed warhead onto a ballistic missile.
It's a literal race against time.
It is a race between American aerospace engineering, specifically those massive ordnance penetrators, and Iranian geology.
There is another layer to this gamble, though, and we touched on it earlier with the Bezier targets. If you are systematically degrading the internal police force from the air, you are clearly expecting, or at least hoping for, a massive civilian uprising.
Yes.
And Trump's video message was incredibly explicit about this. I want to read this line. He says, "This will be probably your only chance for generations to take over your institutions." He is effectively openly calling for a revolution.
Which signals loud and clear that the end game for Washington here isn't just nuclear disarmament. It's total regime change.
Right.
And if you look at the analysis from the Kiev Independent, they point out that the ground inside Iran is far more fertile for an uprising today than it was even a few years ago.
Yeah, we cannot forget what happened in January 2026, just last month. I feel like the global media cycle moved on from it so quickly, but that was an absolute bloodbath.
It was horrific. The estimates are between 6,000 and 30,000 civilians dead in those protests.
Astounding numbers.
The economy had completely collapsed. The currency was virtually worthless. But the fundamental nature of the protests had shifted in a way we hadn't seen before.
It wasn't just people shouting down at the dictator anymore. It was return of the prince. I saw the reports documenting chants for Reza Pahlavi, the son of the deposed Shah.
Yeah.
It feels almost anachronistic, doesn't it? Crowds in 2026 calling for the restoration of a monarchy.
It does sound strange to Western ears. But inside Iran, the Pahlavi era is increasingly being remembered with this intense nostalgia by a generation that never even lived through it.
They just see what they don't have now.
Exactly. They view it as a lost era of economic prosperity and secularism. But here's the major geopolitical breadcrumb that links this all together. You have to look at the Munich meeting.
Ah, the meeting between Zelensky and Pahlavi?
Yes, February 2026, the Munich Security Conference. You have to ask yourself, why would the president of Ukraine, a man who is actively fighting a brutal war for his nation's survival, take precious diplomatic time to meet publicly with an exiled Iranian prince?
Well, the immediate answer is because Iranian drones are actively killing his people in Ukraine.
That's the surface reason, yes. But it's so much more than that. It was a calculated diplomatic signal. It showed the world that the Western alliance, meaning Ukraine, the U.S., NATO, they are actively vetting a replacement.
They're building a shadow government.
Yes. They were actively legitimizing Pahlavi as a viable alternative government on the world stage. That handshake in Munich was the diplomatic groundwork for the military strikes we are watching on our screens today.
It's the classic government in exile strategy being put into play. But this raises a massive, glaring question about Iran's actual allies.
The global players.
Right. If the U.S. is actively trying to install a pro-Western government in Tehran through force, where is Russia? Where is Vladimir Putin today? Usually he'd be threatening global nuclear war over an incursion like this.
That is what we call the Russia problem.
Okay.
Russia is currently paralyzed. And to understand why they haven't reacted forcefully, you have to look back at that bizarre, unprecedented event in January involving Nicolas Maduro.
The Venezuela situation. The kidnapping.
Right. The extraction, if you're the CIA. The kidnapping, if you're quite literally anyone else in the world.
Right.
The United States military literally plucked the sitting president of Venezuela, who is Russia's most critical ally in the Western Hemisphere, right out of his own country.
That story was wild when it broke. But how exactly does a South American extraction tie into the bombing of Iran?
Because it completely shattered the illusion of Russian global protection.
Ah, I see.
Putin couldn't do a single thing to save Maduro. He is entirely bogged down in the Donbass region. His military resources are stretched impossibly thin, and his economy is exhausted.
He's trapped.
He is. And now, just weeks later, the U.S. is openly bombing his key Middle Eastern ally. The message Washington is sending to Moscow is crystal clear. You do not have the bandwidth to stop us anywhere in the world right now.
So Russia is essentially watching its entire geopolitical chessboard get flipped over, and they literally can't move a single pawn to stop it.
Yeah. They are terrified. Think about it strategically. If the Iranian regime falls, the steady supply of Shahed and Geran drones to the Russian army stops overnight.
Which cripples their war effort in Ukraine.
Directly and immediately. Russia has every single reason in the world to intervene today, but they have zero military capacity to actually do so. They are likely working the back channels furiously right now, but they are not going to put fighter jets in the air over Tehran. They can't.
And what about China? They are the other massive player here. They buy the lion's share of Iranian oil.
China is playing the long game, as they always do.
Their public reaction was pretty harsh, though.
Yes, their reaction via the Islamabad Post, warning of World War III, that's entirely for the domestic audience and for grandstanding at the UN. But ignore the rhetoric and look at their actual physical actions today.
Have they moved their navy?
No. Have they mobilized troops to the region? No.
Because at the end of the day, war is bad for business.
Precisely. China needs the oil to keep flowing to fuel their economy. Frankly, Beijing doesn't care if that oil is sold to them by the Ayatollah or by Reza Pahlavi.
As long as the check clears.
As long as the price is stable and the shipping lanes in the Gulf remain open, they will issue furious diplomatic statements all week, but they will not start a shooting war with the United States over the political survival of the Islamic Republic.
So Iran really is truly isolated right now. The sky above them is full of American Raptors. The streets below are ready to explode with angry citizens. And their biggest allies are completely silent.
It's true isolation.
It feels like the perfect engineered storm for the regime to just completely collapse.
It is their moment of maximum vulnerability, without a doubt. But, and this is a massive but that we need to emphasize, regimes do not always fall just because we wargame that they should.
Right.
And this brings us back to the extreme danger of the next 24 hours.
The cornered rat scenario.
Exactly. If the supreme leader and the top brass of the IRGC look at the board and feel that this is truly the end, that the Pahlavi restoration is real and the American bombers aren't going to stop, their internal calculus changes instantly.
Because they have nothing left to lose.
Exactly. They might decide to use whatever they have left in the arsenal.
Are you talking about a dirty bomb scenario? Or just launching whatever conventional missiles survived the first wave of airstrikes?
Could be both. Or it could be launching a chemical weapons attack on Tel Aviv. Or unleashing Hezbollah in Lebanon to fire every single rocket they have across the border, regardless of the consequences for Beirut.
A scorched earth policy.
Right. If they believe they are dead men walking anyway, they might try to take the entire region down in flames with them.
Which highlights exactly why those Arrow and David Sling intercepts over Tel Aviv are so critically important right now.
Every single successful interception over Israel is actively saving the region from an escalation spiral that leads straight to total, unrestrained war.
Okay, so let's zoom out here and synthesize this. We've unpacked the massive military strike, the terrifying nuclear shell game happening under the mountains, the Pahlavi factor in the streets, and the complete geopolitical paralysis of Russia.
We've covered the board.
For the listener who is just trying to process all of this breaking news, what is the single most important thing they need to watch for tomorrow?
Watch the streets of Tehran. Look away from the skies and look at the streets. The airstrikes today are the catalyst, but the final outcome depends entirely on the Iranian people.
How they react to the bombs.
Yes. If the citizens stay home and lock their doors because they are terrified of Trump's warning about bombs dropping everywhere, the regime will likely survive this. They will dig out of the rubble and rebuild.
But if they don't stay home?
If they come out into the streets in the millions because they see the security apparatus crumbling under the airstrikes, then we are looking at a fundamentally new Middle East by Monday.
But that leads to the really scary question, doesn't it? We've seen forced regime change before in this region.
Yes, we have.
We saw Iraq. We saw Libya. It rarely, if ever, goes smoothly.
And that is the exact provocative thought we need to end on today. Everyone is hyper-focused on the explosions today. But let's say Trump gets exactly what he asked for.
Okay.
Let's say the Islamic Republic completely collapses this weekend and Reza Pahlavi lands at Tehran airport next week. Then what?
Right. Who runs the water treatment plants? Who pays the army's salaries?
Exactly. Regional experts are warning right now that the opposition is not organized to govern. They have a very powerful, nostalgic figurehead in Pahlavi, sure, but do they have a functioning bureaucracy ready to step in?
Probably not.
And more importantly, do they have a concrete plan to physically secure the nuclear material at Fordo and Natanz during the transition of power?
It's the ultimate day after problem.
It is. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are we looking at the long-awaited liberation of Iran today? Or are we looking at the creation of a massive power vacuum in a country with 88 million people and a buried, highly enriched nuclear arsenal?
That's a terrifying thought.
Because if there is no unified, competent authority ready to catch the falling pieces, the chaotic vacuum that follows Operation Lion's Roar might turn out to be even more dangerous for the world than the regime it just replaced.
That is a very sobering reality check to end on. We are watching modern history unfold in real time, but we really have no idea where this chapter is going to end. We will obviously keep tracking these developments hour by hour. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Stay safe, everyone.
We'll see you in the next one.